Scary is all about perspective. For some, there is nothing scarier than the long dark of night, whilst others find true terror in being put in a situation where they need to speak publicly. As simplistic as it might sound though, there are generally two types of scares. Those you sign up for example when you watch a scary movie, and those you don't, where a real life situation plays out in ways that are creepy or even terrifying. On this channel, we talk about games which provide the most engaging medium possible to interact with your fears, giving you the element of control that is often missing in most other forms of entertainment, like movies or television. But sometimes, on rare occasions, the gaming world has a glitch, an anomaly in the code that delivers an experience that end users did not sign up for. Whether these glitches were actively or intentionally part of the program, build, or network, the stories you're about to hear were not what the developers had in mind. The following tales are true to life, based on real stories from real people. And while I'm about to share these stories with you, I'll provide links in the description where you can read firsthand about these surreal encounters. Welcome to Scary Stories Part 1, Glitched. The Nintendo 3DS was a creative piece of tech for its time, paving the way for what would eventually become the Nintendo Switch, the portable beast we all know and love. Not only was the 3DS state-of-the-art for playing the latest games on the go, it also featured some useful applications to round out the offering for people of all ages and walks of life, including a pedometer to track steps and activity. This feature proved to be quite popular with audiences, except for the main kids market who care not for tracking exercise. But for many young adults striving to stay fit and healthy, this option seemed to fit well with their lifestyle. The feature was also highlighted in popular games like Nintendogs Plus Cats, rewarding players for adding to their pedometer count whilst out walking their virtual pets. Players could go out for some walking in the evening with their Nintendo pets after a hard day's work, play some games at night, and put it on the charger, ready to go for the next day. So then imagine your terror if you woke up from putting your 3DS on a charger one night, knowing the exact steps you had done, and coming back to find 500 steps logged at midnight. That's what happened to Redditor C. Ron. Many were quick to respond with reasons and explanations. Maybe a nearby phone's vibration had knocked it out, or maybe a pet had knocked the table, having an impact on the internal gyros and mechanisms, causing phantom footsteps, for example. The thing is, would this have happened over 500 times? In the one night? Highly unlikely. And even less so for the poor Redditor who shared this story, convinced there was no reasonable explanation for the extra distance. Spooked from the event, the Redditor was left to surmise the extra steps must be those of a ghost, and a charitable one at that. Have you ever seen a short video clip that is both incredibly quick and sensationally terrifying? Maybe so, but how about one that looks like something that you might see in a kids' TV show, like Sesame Street? In a feature article in Kotaku, developer John Zemansky was kind enough to share this little nightmare with the world, the result of some typical mid-game bug testing that caught even its creator off guard. A new survival horror game for 2021, My Friendly Neighborhood, channels the immersion of a first-person viewpoint in an environment similar to Sesame Street, albeit a lot creepier and a lot more deadly. So you can imagine just how startled John Zemansky was when this little encounter played out during a testing session. In the session, John encountered one of the enemy puppets and did the usual action of shooting, but this time, things did not go as expected. Whereas the puppet would normally fold due to the impact of the bullet slowing its movement to the player, this puppet instantly split into a dozen or so more puppets, with an explosion of creepy-ass clones suddenly filling the small room, furiously scrambling at their creator. Following the event, John was completely freaked out. He immediately dumped the footage into a post that took Twitter by storm. If watching this clip your immediate reaction was to think this game is cursed, I wouldn't blame you. But no, the occurrence was the outcome of a glitch in the coding. See, what happened was the moment John interacted with what he thought was a single puppet, all of the NPC puppets were activated along with their physics. So they began pushing and shoving each other out of the way within a single space in order to reach the player, creating the wave of puppets that's seen in the clip. The bug was so impactful that John has decided to keep it in the game. He's quoted as saying, "This effect is definitely going to make it into the game, but instead of relying on the fail-safe interactions of the physics system, I'll code the effect in a much more quote-unquote intended way." Good to know that mind-bending terror in this game will now be intentional, even if it is still the stuff of nightmare fuel. Radiant oblivion in the sky. Bethesda is a gaming publisher that traces its origins back to 1986, with its formation under Christopher Weaver, a talented developer who rose through the ranks of ABC in the US to become the manager of technology forecasting. The company grew its ranks and experience, culminating in acquisitions, mergers, and even a major, if not somewhat controversial deal with Microsoft in 2020. But particular to gaming circles, Bethesda has developed some of the industry benchmarks, with franchises including the Elder Scrolls series, Fallout, Dishonored, and even more recently Deathloop. Keeping Bethesda successful has been their willingness to tackle complexity and bleeding-edge technology and trends, willing to pioneer a space that others dare not tread. They've built a reputation on their realistic depiction of open-world role-playing games, otherwise known as RPGs. And they have allowed players a new foundation of freedom. Their efforts carved out a new space in gaming, a genre that is now a staple of major developers and franchises worldwide. Programming these massive open worlds could not have succeeded though. There was nothing for the player to do or to interact with. And this was one aspect Bethesda revelled in like no other. They were innovators in the tools required to create a gaming world that would come alive with a new technology called AI, or artificial intelligence. They used this technology to drive characters that inhabited the world along with the player. This AI was used to give the non-player characters, otherwise known as NPCs for short, a purpose, a routine, a set of instructions on how to function within the game. As opposed to what would be considered traditional coding, which involves mapping every aspect of movement and interaction as well as what the player sees, AI provided more of a container approach. It meant you could set rules and boundaries that these NPCs would work with, allowing them to determine how they would move from point A to point B. Think of it more like instead of telling the non-player character every instruction of every day, you would rather give that NPC the what and the why. As for the how, well, that would be up to them. A simple example is to think of raising a child. You see, at first the child will learn the behaviour required for a task, forming a procedure that they will repeat in order to complete the same action. For example, a child might lift their arms up and look at you with those adorable eyes to get picked up. The same child has the freedom of thought, allowing them to learn based off their environment and observations in addition to what you are showing them. Using the same example, they may realise that they can also get the same reaction that have been picked up if they throw a tantrum. The procedure is different, but the outcome is the same. By giving NPCs choice and the freedom to enact that choice based on a motivation, they in turn mimic the human behaviours of learning. But machines are not human. In fact, they are often more calculating and efficient because we have made them that way. And so the procedures they may choose to elicit an outcome may be vastly different from ones that you and I would employ. Without the boundaries of morals, ethics, rules, and consequences, artificial intelligence can enjoy a quote-unquote freedom in their decision-making skills that a human simply would not consider. This is because the events and consequences of that choice are immoral, may be ethically wrong, or they may put us and those around us in harm or danger. Over time, these laws generated simulations in the gaming environments, which culminated en masse with Bethesda's fourth entry into the Elder Scrolls series, known as Oblivion. It was released on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, and took advantage of the enhanced performance to match the game's requirements. Bethesda introduced the world to its new tech, known as the Radiant AI system, the next level AI that not only provided laws, but also simulations of pressure on the non-player characters for things like resources, individual needs, as well as how the player might interact with the system, dynamically changing these pressures whether directly or indirectly. Non-player characters would be assigned a personality type to begin with, but this default personality was susceptible to change, and it would react to the world around it. An example of a base personality would be aggressive enemies, who would typically seek to attack the player on sight. In a game without this type of Radiant AI, this enemy would continue to attack the player, even if another enemy was causing it damage in the course of trying to attack the player. You can all imagine those scenarios in games where you're being attacked by multiple enemies at the same time. But with Radiant AI, the enemy who is now beset by another enemy as a consequence of its typical attack pattern may decide that the other enemy is a higher threat, as the damage is impacting its programmed need to survive. Similar to how any living being may react in the real world, a digital creature will decide the course of action best suited to ensure its survival. In this example, it might now attack the other enemy, allowing the player to move away from the conflict while the two enemies continue their aggression directly with each other. This Radiant AI is seamless, as on nearly all accounts, the non-player character does what you would expect it to do for the personality that it has been assigned, following predictable models and paths that fit their initial design. During development though, it's not unusual for programmers to tweak this programming. The goal is to test extremes and scenarios, aiming to ensure a smooth experience for end users. In adjusting the Radiant AI, developers at Bethesda had a creepy experience that surprised even those who had built the very code being used. When developers allowed the NPCs more freedom to act on their own impulses based on their personal motivation of that character, some results were alarming, where no predictive models could have prepared them for what happened. Like many games, the Elder Scrolls series has potions designed to give players buffs of various types which can affect performance. The perfect trope in gaming is the health potion. Where the Elder Scrolls differs slightly is with the AI system and the substances which are available in-game for both players as well as non-player categories. One such concoction is called skooma, more commonly referred to as moon sugar. Skooma is a fictional potion that increases the user's strength, speed, and stamina. The digital substance is coded to be addictive, with in-game side effects including loss of voice, minor fits, and even on the rare occasion, death. The world is even inhabited with skooma addicts, an eerie reflection of the real world reproduced to provide even more immersion in a game by blurring the lines between the digital and real world's users' experience. In a story shared by an Oblivion game designer, there was a quest with the Dark Brotherhood where the player would meet up with a shady merchant character who sells skooma for an interaction to move the quest forward. But when developers doing the test went to meet the merchant, they found his character dead before they had even arrived. Curious to know how this had happened and why, they investigated the trace logs and were shocked to see the results. With the leash a little looser from NPC guidelines, these non-player characters were inhabiting the local skooma den and were now free to make more choices. In an example of art imitating life, they were trying to get their skooma fix. And when they didn't have any skooma, they were killing the merchant to get it. So that was Radiant AI during development of The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion, somewhere between 2002 and 2006 when the game was released. So around 5 years later, Bethesda would outdo themselves yet again with the release of The Elder Scrolls V: Skyrim. With Skyrim, Bethesda took everything they had learned and raised the bar beyond what games knew to even be possible. The world was massive and filled with so much to do, including quests, side quests, exploration and adventure, that by many it was considered to be overwhelming. Setting the benchmark yet again, Skyrim became the inspiration and yardstick for future blockbusters like The Witcher 3: Wild Hunt and The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. The massive scope also included upgrades to the already legendary AI from Oblivion, with many stories surfacing about NPC behaviours driven by dynamic events in this technical masterpiece. Quoting the Elder Scrolls wiki on fandom, the Radiant AI in Skyrim keeps track of your deeds, good or evil, and modifies character reactions appropriately. If you commit a crime against a character, they may send hired thugs after you to teach you a lesson, or even hire a Dark Brotherhood assassin. If certain characters are killed, others may assume their roles. For example, Solder will become landlord of the Bannered Mare if the original owner is killed. Should you drop an item, characters might ask if they can have it, or say, "Why did you do that?" Or a guard will make you bribe him to prevent a bounty from being raised. Interesting, huh? Whilst Bethesda opted to increase the usage of the Radiant AI system they were testing in Oblivion, the guidelines remained somewhat tight, which is understandable. With so many variables at play, who could possibly account for every scenario that might produce an undesired result? Further to this topic, Bethesda also had to contend with modding, a practice whereby players use developer tools to edit the underlying code and create modifications of the base or vanilla game. Even so, stories started to circle around what could only be called interesting behaviours from non-player characters under particular circumstances. Considering the sheer volume of players, the numbers would still be considered significantly rare. But quantity is not the yardstick of a good story. In researching this topic for one story I knew about from a few years ago, I stumbled across another, and it was quite interesting, listed on the GameFAQs messaging board. You see, in early January 2018, a user named IronShadow23 posted a plea for help. It said simply, "NPCs keep killing each other, and it is really annoying. It keeps interfering with quests, and I have no idea what to do. They'll just say, 'Huh?' or 'What was that?' and then go off to kill someone. Some peaceful NPC in a city, a guard, a follower, a main character, a follower, and even people chasing children. Does anyone have any advice?" Immediate responses came back from other players asking if he had a mod installed or had it activated, which might be impacting the program. Curiously though, another user named Unit17 provided a different view. I'll read it to you now verbatim, but feel free to see the post yourself. The details and links will be in the description. Unit17 said, "You didn't drop anything, did you? NPCs have a few reactions. One is they will pick the item up and give it back. 2, they'll ask to keep the item. But the third one can result in an all-out brawl that, depending on how the NPCs are aligned, for example, who's friend of who, will drag more NPCs in trying to defend their friends. Usually this happens if, say, an NPC you befriended comes to your aid when you were attacked, even if you started the fight. Sometimes a Stormcloak or Imperial Courier will run near a town. When this happens, NPCs will attack the courier depending on who they support. Saw some Riften Guards kill one once, which can draw other NPCs into the fight. For a game with limited NPCs, Bethesda sure put in quite a few ways to kill them off with little to no influence from the player. But if they're going after children, or children attacking, well, then it's probably a mod. The thread ends there and has since been archived, and although you could say that this is a fake designed to troll the forums, a little research uncovers plenty more examples of NPC rating and AI behaviours that can only be described as creepy and unsettling. There's no doubt in my mind that not all of these stories are true, but the example of non-player characters attacking each other is the one that comes up often enough to cast a shred of doubt into even the hardiest of skeptics. So what do you think? Or better yet, do you have your own story of strange AI behaviour in a game? If so, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. For our final story for today, I'd like to share one that personally gave me chills when I discovered it in the dead of night researching for this very video. Far from the complex radiant AI examples I mentioned before from Bethesda, this story is based on a premise that could not be any simpler in its execution. Yet the way the story is conveyed is unsettling and creepy in the purest form. The link to the articles will be in the description if you want to see for yourself, and I encourage you to check them out. I'm going to read the stories as I consume them, a combination of two different articles, unedited for full effect. The first is from Chris Kohler at Wired, who provides a great description of the game and experience. The second article is from Chris Livingston in PC Gamer. Now, I won't spoil the reason for the inclusion of the second piece, but suffice to say it takes a story that is already unsettling and pushes it well into creepy territory. And so goes the final tale of this video, titled simply The Graveyard. The first article from Wired, Chris Kohler. Tale of Tales, the Belgian indie developers currently hard at work on the very intriguing experimental game The Path, released a brief but very interesting little game today. Called The Graveyard, it's a 10-minute scene that they describe as more like an explorable painting than an actual game. The gameplay, if you can call it that, is simple. You walk an old woman up a graveyard path to a bench in the distance. She sits. The scene takes place. When it's over, you lead her out of the graveyard. The value here isn't in the gameplay. It's the carefully crafted aesthetic experience, and it's successful in my case. It drew out an emotional response from the player. You can download it for free on either PC or Mac and try it out for yourself if you like. When you're finished, my thoughts are below. Interactivity is a powerful thing. The Graveyard could have been a short film on YouTube and lost none of its presentational qualities or its message, but the very limited interaction you have with the character, the fact that you can walk her forward and backward or turn, instantly makes the connection deeper and more powerful than it would have been if you were simply watching. One very specific reason for this is that by controlling the woman, you immediately understand how old and frail she is. She hobbles convincingly towards the bench, which seems very far away. After a few steps, she can't keep up the pace on her bad leg, so she starts limping, leaning on her cane for support. By the time she makes it to the bench, you're glad to be able to just sit down and rest. Soon after you do, the scene starts up. It's a song with lyrics in some European language that I do not know and subtitles in English. At first the lyrics seem a bit ridiculous, maybe something lost in the translation, but after a few seconds it's clear but it's a melancholy song about death and dying. The woman's face comes into clear view, and we see the deep wrinkles, the roughly chopped hair. She listens to the song playing in her mind, looking over the gravestones, thinking about all the different ways that she's seen people die, much like how the close-up of her face is superimposed over the shot. Images of the gravestones you passed start appearing. And when the song is over, it repeats again without subtitles. And at any time, you can walk and end your morbid reminiscence. Simply get up and walk out of the graveyard. And when she ambles back through the front gates, the game ends. This alone had been a solid use of my 10 minutes. Tale of Tales is doing an excellent job at pushing the envelope in regards to game design. I've played the first level of The Path, which has the same economical style of character design and storytelling, giving you an unintentionally vague idea of what's going on and encouraging you to fill in the blanks yourself. But then one more twist. For $5 I could buy the full version of the graveyard. It would be identical to the trial version, they promise, but with one more feature. The woman might die. What could I do? I spent the $5. I played it again, no death. Played it again. I was sitting there listening to the song, wondering if I was maybe doing something wrong, or if perhaps despite all appearances this woman was actually in robust health, and it was going to take a while. Then without warning, her head snapped forward and lolled lifelessly in front of her as her shoulders slumped. She sat on the bench, dead. The close-up of her face was still superimposed, but now it was a close-up of the back of her neck, as it craned grotesquely forward. The song kept playing. Once I was over the sudden shock of the death scene, and come to terms with the fact that nothing else was going to happen, it felt like the proper ending. She'd been travelling long enough, lost everyone dear to her, and had nothing left but to visit the graveyard and count all the headstones of those she had lost. I'll move now to the article from Chris Livingston, a PC gamer. He says, I was playing the graveyard. Now, despite the title, it's not a horror game. It's an experimental art game by A Tale of Tales. In it, you slowly escort an elderly woman through a cemetery. You listen to a strange little song, and then a woman sits down for a rest on the bench, and that's essentially it, at least in the free version. In the paid version, there's a chance that while the old woman is sitting on the bench, she'll die. My morbid curiosity led me to buy the game, and there I was, watching her rest on the bench for several long, uneventful minutes. At one point, my cat jumped up onto my desk, and he was a large and boisterous cat, and this led him to knocking over a bunch of things. After a moment spent straightening up, I looked back up at the screen. The old woman was dead. I'm not a deep thinker, but this still led to a few moments of solemn reflection on how minor distractions can cause you to miss the most important events in life, and how our lives are fleeting, and someday we'll all be passing away on that same metaphorical bench, perhaps while someone important to us is busy attending to something else. A few weeks later though, my morbid curiosity surfaced again. I'd gotten something out of the graveyard, those few thoughtful moments, but I hadn't actually witnessed that old woman die. So I started the game again, determined to see what actually happened. When the game loaded, instead of it beginning with the walk through the cemetery, it simply started at the bench where the old woman was still sitting there dead. I was completely shocked and aghast. I freaked out. I think I actually got out of my chair and left the room. I mean, yikes, gross, ew, and no. I had no reflective thoughts on how once we die we're dead for all eternity or anything like that. Just the thought that there's been an old dead woman on my computer for the last several weeks. Just sitting there, dead and alone, and dead while I was playing other games. I immediately uninstalled it and then double checked to make sure all the files were completely gone. It was just too damn creepy to know she was there. Her lifeless virtual body haunting my PC. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us here at GameSmiths. If you have an eerie story of your own, I'd love to know more, so please let us know in the comments. Today's content was something a little different, so if you liked it, a thumbs up or a comment would go a long way in letting me know if you'd like to see more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up with any new videos. That'll do us for today. So, once again, thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day. And as always, stay amazing. See you next time.